All right. Good evening. We are back again tonight with Mark Ludwig. Mark has been in the field fighting for shared parenting for quite a while 40 years in the political arena as a campaign manager, as an advisor, and also as a candidate. He served in the Missouri Small Business Policy Council during Governor Blunt's administration. He's the founder of Americans for Equal Shared Parenting, and he made a lot of efforts meeting over 600 legislators from over 30 states regarding shared parenting legislation. He's been on several TV shows, almost about 300 or so TV and radio interviews. He has testified in over 2 dozen Senate hearings in 9 different states. He also organized a collaboration with leaders of over 60 shared parenting organizations in DC back in 2018. Mark has been, advocating for shared parenting, something that I see that he's very passionate about. I guess based on his own personal experience, and from some feedback I got from some of your friends, Mark. I mean, they spoke highly of you, how passionate you are as a dad, and how much you love to see shared parenting laws passed across the country. And so we are very honored to have you with us tonight, to share some of your successes, and hopefully we can learn some lessons from you, and be able to, somehow apply some of the techniques that you use here in Canada. So we are very grateful to have you with us tonight, Mark. Thank you so much for your time. Bill, before I move on to Mark with the questions, do you have any comments before we bring Mark on?
Yeah, just like to say thank you, Mark, for joining us. I've been following your work for years. I love what you're doing, and I'd like to learn more about how you got started in this field. I know how both Ben and I got started in advocating for equal shared parenting and fathers' rights. And I'd love to hear how you ended up on your journey getting here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
well,
Mark, how? Go ahead. Go ahead,
yeah,
Mark.
thanks
Go
for
ahead.
having me on, and thanks for the work that you do. That's the beauty of the shared parenting community is each of us have different skills, abilities, and talents, and can reach people in a different way. There's no one person that's the answer. It takes all different efforts, all combining, working together as a team and collaborating. And you guys do a great job from what I've been seeing. You do. I apologize. You came on my radar screen a couple of maybe about 4 or 5 months ago for the first time. But from what I'm seeing, I'm highly, highly impressed. You do a great job of helping to raise awareness and get the word out. So a great addition to the shared parenting community.
Thank you so
Thank,
much, Mark.
thank you, Mark.
This is an area that I guess we're all very passionate about. We all want to see change, for the best interest of our children. I believe shared parenting goes, uh, a long way to, uh, help with our children's mental and emotional health. I believe that's the best that we should have. I mean, nobody should deny a child access to one or the other parents. They should have an equal right, having both parents actively involved in their lives. So, how did you get involved in this movement? I know you started 8 years ago. What was the trigger for you?
Well, I've been involved in the political arena for 40 years now. I turn 60 next year,
Wow,
but
you
I've
look
been
young.
around the political arena for 40 years now. And literally, ever since I was 6 years old, my goal was to be president of the United States.
Wow.
And if you ask anybody I went to grade school with, that was and I was very serious about it. I never drank, I never smoked. I watched everything that I did just because I knew they would be digging into my past.
Mm.
And I was, class president, student body president, and college Republican president for my state, and started working on campaigns in college and gubernatorial campaigns, Senate campaigns, and then I was actually a candidate myself for U.S. Congress against Dick Gephardt, who at the time was the third most powerful Democrat in the United States when I ran. And that got me a lot of national notoriety. I got to be pretty decent friends with Newt Gingrich, who was a personal mentor of mine. He was the Speaker of the House of the U.S. at that point. Got to know Kellyanne Conway, who was the campaign manager for Trump when he won in 2016. I knew her before she was married. It was Kellyanne Fitzpatrick when I knew her. But I got to know all these people and had planned on jumping into my campaign right at the time I met my son's mother. And without going into all the details, shortly after he was born, he was moved without my knowledge. It took me 204 days to track him down. And during that period of time, I lost all desire for anything political. I just wanted to be, as you know, I just wanted to be a dad. I had no interest in politics or anything. I just wanted to find my son. And so I put my career on hold. And between the financial challenge, you guys are aware, the financial challenges, and then with the stress on the body, I had some pretty severe health challenges. And then just everything I was going through, I took quite a valley. I was down there and had a bit of a pity party for a while, just wondering what happened. I would have been a great dad, and just shocked, as a lot of people were, when you look at the situation. I was surprised I didn't get full custody. I mean, knowing without going into all the details, I was just shocked as all get out that she would have gotten any custody at all. And to find out that I was basically relegated to less than an every other weekend visitor, I lost all desire for anything in life. And then finally, after a while, I started coming across some of the shared parenting pages and saw people that I could understand and I could relate to. They had a pain, they had an anger, they had a frustration. And the challenge is they weren't communicating with legislators the way they needed to be. And coming from the legislative background, I understood both sides of the spectrum. I understood their anger and their frustration, but I also understood the way they were going about it. Not only was it not helping their cause, it was chasing legislators the opposite direction. And so it finally dawned on me, why don't I start trying to do some Facebook Lives to educate people from a legislator's perspective, the best way to communicate with them? Because most legislators don't become a legislator hating dads and wanting to keep parents away from their kids. They're just uneducated about the situation. And most people that I saw 8 years ago, the first words out of their mouth were, if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to vote you out of office, and you're going to regret the day you met me if you don't pass this law. And I'm thinking, basic sales skills 101, build a relationship, build a friendship with people. You don't just attack somebody. I always give the analogy, if you're walking down the street in New York and there's two street vendors, and one comes up yelling at you, trying to cram a hot dog down your throat, you better take this. And the other person says, hey, would you like a hot dog? Would you like some ketchup? Would you like some mustard? I'm probably going to the friendly one. And the next day I'm walking around the street the opposite way of the other guy. And so I started doing some Facebook Lives educating people about the proper way to meet with legislators. How do you open the door? How do you first off, you can't go in with the anger mentality, because that feeds into the narrative. This person might have anger management problems. Maybe they shouldn't be a dad. And so, talking to people about how do you open the door? How do you condense your story? Most of us, myself included, I used to give a 2-hour dissertation on my story. And I was and I pulled into the driveway and she was at the sidewalk. And as she came walking down the sidewalk, I got in my car, the left side. And then I walked around to the right side. And we need the Cliff Notes version. We don't need the step-by-step, play-by-play. You've got 30 seconds, at the most 60 seconds, to tell your story to a legislator. Anything over 60 seconds, you've lost them. So the details of how you got out of the car, that's not important if you've got 60 seconds. You've got to condense it to the meat and potatoes. So I started doing Facebook Lives, talking about that, talking about how do you get past a gatekeeper, because most people, if they've never been around legislators, they're going to get a legislative aide whose goal is to screen calls. Most legislators, a lot of people don't realize how much work a legislator does and how underpaid they really are. They have this, feeling that legislators just sort of waltz in, spend 2 hours a day, cast a couple of votes. Now, I've been around legislators that wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and they're at the Capitol by 6:30. They're reading through a stack of bills every single day that would take most people 8 hours, and they've got about an hour and a half to 2 hours to feed through these bills. Then they're taking calls from constituents. They have committee meetings. Then they have their actual, floor votes and everything. Then they're going back to committees. Then they're fielding phone calls. They're meeting with people. Their day is packed. And from some of them, it's packed from 6 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, 5 and 6 days a week. And so they're going to have a gatekeeper whose goal is to screen the calls. So how do you get past that person? How do you find a bill sponsor? How do you maneuver through the minefield, if you will? And I started doing these Facebook Lives on Monday night that sort of caught fire. And for a while, I was getting as many as 10, 12,000 people on Monday nights watching these Facebook Lives. And then I started getting phone calls from people saying, hey, how do I do this? And so my ultimate goal is, as I say over and over, and I mean this from my heart, I don't want to be the guy. I'd rather train the guy. I'd rather have an army of 1,000 people, because my whole philosophy is, if it's dependent on me and something happens to me, everything's shot. I don't want that. I don't want my son to have to go through what I went through. So I don't care about the credit and the recognition and the trophies. I want to train 1,000 people out there that never need me to show up to their capital. And I would be very happy with, at the end of my funeral, when everybody's eating potato salad and coleslaw, people would say, you know what? Because of something I learned from him, I passed a law in this state, or I did this in this state. Not that Mark passed the law, but he gave me a small little tip, because I think of the nuggets that I learned from Newt Gingrich. When I ran for U.S. Congress, I got a lot of knowledge and wisdom from a guy who was front and center in the political arena in the United States. And, a lot of the things I've accomplished, it wasn't Newt that accomplished it, but I'll tell you what, my life would be very different without a handful of hour-long conversations I had with him. And so my hope is to be that person for other people, to help sort of be the person behind the curtain that can sort of give them, hey, do this, do this, do this. Run out and do it, and then give me a call at night and let me know how it goes, and we'll do a little plan, do, check, adjust, and then we'll go out and try something different tomorrow to see how we can get. So very, very fortunate that over the last 8 years, I've been able to help coach people in about 30 different states at this point. And every day I'm on the phone for a couple hours a day talking to different states through. And the neat thing is they're the ones doing the work. I'm grateful a lot of them give me credit, but it really isn't me. They are the ones doing it. And the hope that I tell people is, we're not looking for people with a special background. So many times people think, well, I'm not an attorney. I couldn't do that. I'll just tell you, an attorney is the worst person you want advocating for you. If I'm a legislator, I'm looking at my constituents. And an average dad off the street with no political background means more to me than an attorney coming into my office. I want to hear the heart. And the heart comes from people before they've been through the ringer of trying to get legislation passed. One of the biggest challenges I see is people start working in a capital and they start trying to get legislation passed, and they become so educated that they're inefficient anymore and ineffective because they're talking over the heads of people. Whereas the brand new dad who doesn't know what the term rebuttable presumption means, that doesn't know what a standard of evidence means, that's the most effective person talking with a legislator. When I do TV and radio interviews, and I've been trained for 40 years on how to do interviews for candidates, they always say you need to talk at a 6th grade level or below. And nowadays they tell people 4th grade level or below because education levels have dropped so much in the world. But you can't talk in terms. You may try to sound impressive to yourself, but you're not trying to impress yourself. Are you trying to impress people, or are you trying to convince people? If you're trying to convince and educate people, you need to dumb it down to where the average person says, you know what, that makes sense to me. Because if you take the person who can recite every statute, every law, every definition, or somebody that can get you to the heart, take somebody who's an 18-year-old girl who hasn't seen her dad in the last 8 years that says, you know what, I spent the last 8 years without my dad. I didn't have somebody to talk to when I got home from school. I didn't have somebody to go to when I got my report card. I didn't have somebody to teach me how to ride a bike. That's what's going to get a legislator, not somebody that can quote every Linda Nielsen study and every book that they've read. So for the people who are out there, if you say, well, I'd like to get legislation passed, but I don't know what to do, you're the ones we want. That's what we need. We need 1,000 people like you that say, you know what, I'm willing to be trained, I'm willing to be educated. That's the kind of person I love to work with, because that's how we're going to get the legislation passed. That's why I'm excited, Ben, when you said you've only been around for a year. That's the people who are actually making the changes.
Okay, guys, this remark is directed at me. Bill has joint custody. Bill is vindictive towards the children's mother. November 22nd, Bill finally got his 3-day hearing in court. He alleged 26 counts of contempt. He lost all because he had no proof. I've been getting messages like this on my personal blog, my personal Facebook page, and on numerous other pages and avenues such as this here. And I'd like to apologize for somebody taking the time to try to air my personal and private family issues here. But I would like to tell you that I am currently working on a documentary that will address these allegations against me and show the truth that it's been happening for years in this process. So CK Smith, if you'd like, my number is 506-639-1809. You can call me, that's my cell phone, and I can provide you with correct information about what is really going on in this case. And I have a Facebook page and a blog and a YouTube channel where I also share a lot of this information. So I'm not trying to hide anything. If anyone wants to learn about my case, feel free to contact me and message me. And also, like I said, I plan on sharing the evidence I have in a documentary called Parental Alienation in the Family Court System. So thank you, CK Smith, for bringing this up. Sorry, guys. I hate to take that away from you.
No, that's okay. But I mean, Mark, it goes back to what you were sharing about people really coming to the knowledge of having both parents equally active in the lives of children. In your case, you have to drop your career. You have to basically abandon everything. I believe, you had some great ambitions, things that you wanted to accomplish in life. But because of the love that you had, for your son, you basically had to put your son first. And, for,
I
somebody
don't know
like,
that I necessarily regret it. Looking back now, I do think maybe it was meant to be, not to be over spiritualistic, but based on my own beliefs, I believe it was meant to be. Sometimes God has a different plan for our lives than we want.
Yeah.
And I thought my life was meant to go a different way. But now that I look back, I think the reason I've been so effective with legislators is because I can talk their language. And I was one of them. And especially in Missouri, I'm very well known. I've raised a lot of money for legislators over the years in Missouri. And there's two things that will get a legislator's attention. One is money, and the other is votes. And not in a bad or unethical way, but if every legislator who goes to office has a passion for something. For some people, it's the Second Amendment rights. For some people, it's pro-life issues. For some people, it's education. For us, it's shared parenting. But every person there's a reason why some people say, you know what, I've had it, I'm running for office. Within that realm is going to be about 3 to 7 issues that really hit their hot button. Everything else for them, they kind of care about, but not as much as those issues. And I give the example, it's like our own kids. I love kids. I love volunteering for kids. I've worked on a lot of board of directors and a lot of organizations in the past for kids. I love contributing to kids, but nobody's at the level Levi is. I will die for Levi. And so that's the same way most legislators are. There's at least 1 or 2 issues that are so high on their list. Everything else is just noise and background. But to get that issue passed, they have to either get in office or stay in office. Well, how you get in office? You get elected. How do you get elected? You need votes and you need money to run your campaign. And so not in an unethical way, but in the U.S., in all 50 states, every 2 years, every member of the House has to get reelected. So the easiest way to get a legislator's attention is, because if I'm running for office, I have a choice. I can go meet one voter one-on-one and try to convince them to vote for me, Or I can get a group of people, and I can get an influencer who can probably get 50, 100, 1,000 votes, because if I get this person, they've influenced 1,000 people. Or if I get this person, they can help me raise, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 instead of getting one $200 check from one individual. So the key is you need to become that type of person to the legislators. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people in the past that haven't understood that. They think they're just going to educate a legislator, and the person's going to have an aha moment and say, wow, you educated me so much. This is now my number one passion. I'm going to fight for equal shared parenting. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You've got to become a friend with the legislator, and friendships happen outside the Capitol. I always tell people, if the only way a legislator knows you is inside the walls of the Capitol, you have zero effectiveness with that legislator. None. Because you are competing with hundreds of people that are walking the halls of that Capitol. If you want to get effective legislation passed, you need to meet a legislator out of the Capitol. Go to a Chamber of Commerce event that they're going to be attending. Go to a ribbon cutting in your town that they're going to be attending. Go to an Eagle Scout presentation that they're going to be the presenter at. You need to meet them outside the Capitol. Because then when you go to the Capitol and you call them and try and set an appointment, hey, I met them at an Eagle Scout. Because if you call and say, I met you at the Capitol, well, yeah, they met 1,000 other people that week. But they only met a handful of people at the Eagle Scout ceremony or at the town hall meeting. And so you're going to stick out and they're going to remember you, especially if you help them campaign. During the campaign time, which is about ready, most summers, they're going to barbecues all over town. You need to be at those barbecues. That's how you build the friendships. And that's how you get, for the most part, I don't go to Jefferson City, which is the capital of Missouri. I go there maybe twice a year. I can get so much done on my cell phone because most of the legislators, the Speaker of the House, the Speaker Pro Tem, I've got all their cell phone numbers in my phone. And I can call them on the phone at night when they're at home or in their apartment in Jeff City and get a lot more accomplished than I can in the walls of the Capitol. But how did I get those friendships? I went to campaign events. I went door knocking with them during campaign season. I went to barbecues with them. I went to Eagle Scout ceremonies. And I built the friendship because most legislators, and I was just at the Illinois Capitol a couple of weeks ago. I took a bunch of kids for a tour. And I was talking to Jed Davis, who's a state rep in Illinois. And he said that this year, there's going to be close to 5,000 bill ideas in the state of Illinois alone. Just in one state, 5,000 potential bills. Now think of this. You're a legislator. How are you going to educate yourself on anybody remember in college when you had to, you had a hard enough time studying 6 subjects in college? How are you going to study 5,000 subjects? You're not. What you're going to do is if a bill relates to chiropractic, you're going to call your chiropractor and you're going to say, hey, there's a bill coming up. I don't understand this bill. Can I email you this bill and you read through it and let me know, what do you think I should vote for regarding this bill? Or if you have a bill regarding education and a friend of yours that you went to high school with as a teacher, you're going to call that friend of yours and say, hey, there's a bill coming up in the legislature about education. I'm not really up on this. Can I email you this bill and you read it and let me know? Because I get that from legislators on a regular basis that send me bills and ask me, hey, Mark, what do you think about this bill? It affects kids. But I've become known by legislators in Missouri as the guy who advocates for kids. So that's what we want you to do. You need to build the friendships. So when they have a question and it revolves around kids, you're the one they think of. And it's very simple to do. Like I said, it's you don't have to educate yourself on all the details and all the statistics. It's neat to know some of those statistics. And don't ever give wrong statistics. If you don't know the statistics, just admit that you don't know. But hey, I'll find out and I'll get back with you the information. Sometimes we have people that I don't know if they either don't know the answer or they're just trying to bluff their way through, but they'll come up with information and they'll say, Title 4D, do you know that the state makes 66 cents on the dollar for every dollar they collect in child support? No, that's not true. That's very factually incorrect. And if you're talking to a legislator who does some digging and finds out that's factually incorrect, you've lost all credibility now because you just gave them an inaccurate statistic. And if they're thinking of you as a source and now they don't do their research, and they talk to another legislator and they say, did you know 66 cents on the dollar of every dollar collected in child support goes to the state? And another legislator says, no, that's not true. Now this legislator looks bad to the new one. And now you look bad to both legislators, and you've lost all credibility. So I always tell people, if you don't know the facts, there's nothing wrong with that. Just say, hey, I don't know the information off the tip of my tongue, but I'll get back with you on the information, and you can follow through. But I give the analogy, it's almost like at a company, at a corporate headquarters. You've got the engineers who design the product, and you've got the salespeople who sell the product. Who makes the most money? It's not the engineers. Engineers make a great income, but nothing compared to the salespeople that sell it. I've got a buddy of mine that sells high-end communication systems to corporations. And there's times he'll sell like a $20 million package to a major corporation, and he may make as much as $1 million commission in one sale. And he tells me all the time, I'm like, man, you must know all kinds of details about this. He's like, Mark, I know nothing about this. He says, I got engineers, but I do know how to play golf with these people. And I know how to ask about their kids. And I know how to ask about their passions in life. And I know how to build a friendship with them. And to the point where when they're making a multi-million-dollar decision for their company, they trust me. And they know that I may not know the answer, but I can make a phone call to an engineer and I can get the answer back. So I always tell people, if you have a choice between studying every research analysis that's ever been done on parental alienation, or reading a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People, or Skill with People, or some of those basic books that talk about dealing with people skills, you can be so much more effective just reading those books and building a friendship. Because most people that go to a Capitol, they're cramming down a subject down a legislator's throat. So few people talk to a legislator about hunting or what their kids did last week. And I'm telling you, if you will look on a Facebook page and look at what their kids are doing, look at how they're going turkey hunting this weekend. And then when you go to the Capitol, say, hey, how was turkey hunting? Did you get anything? Hey, how'd your son do? I heard this was the first time they're going turkey hunting. They're going to remember you because you're the only person all day long that asked about them. And legislators are people, all of us. Think about it. What do I love talking the most about? My son. What do all of us like to talk about? We like to talk about our kids. Legislators are the same way. Get them talking about what they're excited about, and they're going to remember you. And now when you call them up, and that's what my buddy Jess says. He says, you know what? I will spend a year making a sales pitch to a corporation. And he said 90% of that time, I will never even mention my company or my product. I'm asking questions. I'm asking about their life. I'm asking about their company. What do they like about their job? What do they not like about their job? What's their hot button? What's the biggest pride moment that they've had in their life that they're the proudest of? And he said, then I sprinkle in every once in a while something about the company, because he said most of the time, if you're asking about them, they're going to ask you. And he told me one time he made a deal that I think he said he made $400,000 commission. And he can't ever remember talking about the product. He spent a year taking them golfing and hunting and everything like that. And he said the one time they get done with a hunting trip, and at the end they said, oh, by the way, send your paperwork over. We're going to sign your deal on Monday. And he said, I never talked about it. The whole weekend, we never mentioned anything at all about this deal. And he said, I made about a $400,000 commission on that deal because we talked about hunting. And you'd be surprised how legislators are the same way. So that's why I said, if somebody has the passion, the desire, you don't need to know all the details. I can teach you that. You're going to have to learn the people skills and how to relate to them. But that's what most of it is. And I look at the superstars across the country. And in the U.S., we're so blessed. We have people in Oklahoma. We've got a Chris Rainbow that's a veteran. And I met him in Washington, D.C. And he's just, you can tell he's passionate as a dad. And it comes across. And as he talks to legislators, he'll even tell you he's not the most educated on every detail about rebuttable presumptions. But every legislator that talks to him can tell his heart. And I'll tell you what, he's very effective in Oklahoma. And all across the country, I see people like that are making waves. And we've made a lot of progress in the last 8 years across the U.S.
Bill, yeah, Bill, any questions? Any follow-up questions for Mark?
Yeah, no, I think you have. I think you've had a very positive uh, impact on helping people try to present this to their legislators. I understand what you're saying. You're trying to humanize the people. The problem is most of us, like yourself, you said you were in your little, you get stuck in the mud and you
Yeah.
just don't know how to get out. And you need some support. You need some help to get past that. And until they start to move forward, you're right. They're not going to be able to present any information coherently, or they'd be more likely to push people away from them because they are traumatized. And
Yeah, I always
people
tell
don't.
people the first year after your custody battle, you don't want to meet with a legislator. You need to work on you before you can
Yes.
meet. So many people, I get this every day, and I know people mean well, but they'll call me up and they're like, I just got out of court and I want to pass the Jimmy Jones Jr. bill. They always want to name a bill after their own kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, if we did that, we'd have 21 million bills going in because everybody would name the bill after your kid.
Yeah.
So first off, you need to grow yourself after that, and then get to a point. And the other thing I tell people is as I mentioned earlier, you've got 60 seconds to tell your story. If it's more than 60 seconds, you're coming across as a bitter, angry dad, not as someone who's fighting for legislative change for everyone. The only reason you're telling your story is sort of, as you alluded to, Bill, is to humanize the topic and to connect to the heart so they realize. So when I tell my story, I go through and I talk about the 204 days that he was kidnapped and how I had to fight for, and then I started educating myself, and then I quickly make the transition. So I didn't even spend 60 seconds. I spend about 20 seconds on my story. And then I immediately pivot to, hey, the macro picture. I became educated on kids who grew up without a dad and how prevalent it was that those kids end up with drug abuse problems, behavioral problems, become teenage runaways, incarceration problems. 80 to 90% of all those issues are kids who grew up without a dad. And I started realizing the reason why. And then I go into the education process. Because from a child's perspective, they love mom and dad both equally. And all of a sudden, those parents aren't together anymore and they're confused and they don't know how to articulate that. A child, I don't care if they're 12 years old, they can't articulate the confusion they have. So they have a first trauma that mom and dad aren't together, and it's bottling up inside because they don't know how to articulate it. And then immediately they have a second trauma. Why do I only get to see one parent every other weekend or less than that? Does that parent not love me enough? Did I do something wrong that I don't qualify to see that? Or even worse, they get the one parent who badmouths the non-custodial parent. And so now they've got another trauma that they're bottling up inside. And then about the teenage years, this trauma starts manifesting in the high school dropout rates, in the behavioral problems, because that's the kid's release and they don't even realize what happened. So I educate legislators on this process, and I say, yes, there's some dads who walk away, and mothers too. I just talk from my perspective because I'm a dad, but because every once in a while I get people, you're only talking about dads. Well, I'm a dad. And so when I tell my story, I'm going to tell it from a dad's perspective. I'll fight just as hard for mother too. And I encourage you, if a mother, tell your story from the mom's perspective. But when I'm talking to a legislator, I tell my story, and then I say, but I tell you what, and this is the most important part of everybody's story when you're talking to a legislator. But I tell you what, in your district, there's 100 or 1,000 people just like me that are your constituents that you don't know about. Because everybody knows half of all, kids are born out of wedlock today anyway, and half of all marriages end in divorce. Think of how prevalent this is around the country. It's in every district, every neighborhood, every church, every workplace, every school. It's out there. The challenge is until it happens to you, you don't notice it. I give the analogy, I still remember one time I bought a new car and I was driving to work. This is years ago. I was driving to the bank that I worked at. And before I had bought that car, I swore that I had never seen any of that type of car before. And that day on the work, I swore I saw like 30 of them in one day. I'm like, what the heck? all these people buy this car the same day I did. What the heck is going on? And no, it became in my reticular activating system. Then all of a sudden it was on my radar, and I started noticing that. And everybody's like that. When you buy a new car, you notice all the people who have that kind of car. Same thing happens when you go through a custody battle. It was never on your radar screen. And once it happens to you, all of a sudden you start noticing the little signs of, the kids who don't talk about dad, or the fact that one dad doesn't seem to be able to be there all the time. And that's when all of a sudden it hits. And for me, I had, the 3 big TV stations in St. Louis ran a thing on my story. And so it hit all over St. Louis. So I got bombarded with phone calls. And I mean, thousands of them over the last 8 years. And yet, if you'd have talked to me 13 years ago, I would have thought it's not a problem.
No.
And therein lies the challenge. The average legislator who hasn't had it happen to them needs to be educated. But most of them, if you get them talking, you'll find out maybe it didn't happen to them, but somebody that they work with, somebody they go to church with, somebody their kids go to school with, somebody, a distant relative in their family, had a situation, and they need to call that person. Because I'm just amazed how prevalent it has become. One of the neatest guys, a guy who's been a mentor of mine for years, a guy named Bob McEwen, probably one of the biggest political influencers in the United States. He's been an advisor to 5 U.S. presidents. Just a neat guy. He's the head of the Council for National Policy, which is one of the big mega influencers. There's about 200 organizations that are part of this council. And I'm talking big organizations. And he's the head of the whole thing. And Bob and I have been acquaintances for years, probably 30 years. And he's been a mentor of mine for 20. I didn't realize his brother went through this. And he started following my Facebook page, and he reached out to me one day and he said, Mark, I don't know if you realize this, but he said, my brother at one time was expected to be more successful than me. He had everything going for him. Straight A student in college, all the accolades, all the awards, was recognized in his city as this up and coming guy. And he came home from work one night and found all this stuff on the side of the road, and the sheriff there, and a false allegation had been filed against him that hit the newspapers, and his image was tarnished immediately because it was all over the newspapers and the TV in Ohio. And he went from being a pillar in the community to somebody nobody would talk to because of all these false allegations. 3 weeks later, it was proven the allegations were false. The challenge is it had already been all over TV. It had already been over. And as a result, there was a handful of people that supported him, but 95%, he lost his business. He lost everything. And Bob tells the story. He told it at one of our Americans for Equal Shared Parenting conferences in DC. He came in as a guest speaker one time, and he told the story. He said, if you were to see my brother today, you would not believe that we are brothers. His self-image is down. He has no desire, no ambition, no desire to talk to anybody. He just became a shell of an individual. And he said, sadly, he was better than me years ago, but because of a custody battle. And the sad thing is, so many of us know somebody like that. We just didn't hear the story behind it. So what we need to do is start talking to legislators, because I'm amazed in almost every state that I've gone to, within one day, I find some legislator that comes up to me and says, I'm so glad you came here. That happened to my brother. Hey, that happened to a friend of mine. That happened to this person. And yet people aren't aware of it. So we just need, as I said, thousands of people out there educating legislators, and we're going to get more of these stories to find out who are these people. In Missouri, both of our bill sponsors, we have companion bills in both the House and the Senate this year, and our sponsors on both sides were directly affected. On the House side, my state rep, Jim Murphy, was alienated from his oldest child, and still is to this day. He's a very effective bill sponsor. And on the Senate side, Rick Bratton, our bill that should be going hopefully this week to the Senate floor, for the first time in 8 years. In Missouri, we've passed the House 8 years in a row. And every year it goes to the Senate. We had one person filibustering who got termed out. So this is our first year without her there. And we just passed the Senate committee unanimously. So now the next step is to go to the Senate floor. And if it passes there, it goes to the House where we know it's going to pass. But our sponsor in the Senate, Rick Bratton, same thing, personally affected. Those people are out there in legislatures all over the country. We just need to find who those people are. But they're becoming more and more prevalent.
Right. I have a question on Facebook. One of our viewers basically he says so much when you look at equal parenting laws, even in states where they have been passed. There's a lot of states their laws haven't been cast that haven't been enforced. So I think basically what this uh, person is saying is that most of the shared parenting laws that have been passed are not being enforced. If
Well, a couple
if
things
I'm
about that.
summarizing it right.
That's where you do need to have. I say you don't. If I could be one person, I'd rather be the salesperson than the engineer. But you better have an engineer though. And so some people try and pass a bill, a piece of legislation, but they don't understand some of the dynamics of the verbiage. So, one or two words can totally, if a piece of legislation says they shall do this or they may do this, that's a totally different meaning. May do that means that a judge may do it, he may not. Shall do that means the judge has to do that. So sometimes people pass legislation and they're excited because they passed something. So we do have people across the country that can look at the legislation. So if you get legislation filed, give me a call or one of these people and we can have him run it through the ringer to make sure. But there's times where people say, well, this bill passed and it's not effective. Well, it is effective the way it was written. Now, for many of the bills, the key is to just send the message to judges across the state that this is what we're shooting for. Because just passing, in Missouri, we passed what was called facts, findings, and conclusions back in 2016. And a lot of people thought that was a 50-50 bill. That wasn't a 50-50 bill. All it said that if a judge doesn't give 50-50, they have to give written facts and findings on their conclusions. Because before that, a judge could just say, I'm giving you every other weekend. But they don't have to give a reason. Well, you can't appeal a case based on you didn't like the outcome. You can only appeal a case based on the rule of law. Well, the judge didn't have to. And in 2016 in Missouri, we passed that law that now a judge has to address 8 determining factors. If they don't, now you can appeal the case. So technically, we don't have 50-50 in Missouri, but the pendulum swung a big way in 2016, and everybody knows it across the state. So in 80% of the cases, you're going to get a much more beneficial ruling in Missouri than you would have. However, because of the definitions, there's still 20% of the judges that they don't want to give 50-50, and they're going to find the verbiage in that bill that they don't have to follow. So for most states, the judges are following the bills the way they're written. We just need to tighten up the bills. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that was a bad bill passed, by the way. Anytime a bill passes, we're at least moving the football down the field. Sometimes we just, we'll get as far as we can get, and then we need to come back in the future and try and tighten a loophole somewhere. So I do think the bills that have been passed as a whole have benefited every single state that we've passed in a huge way. If you look at Kentucky, at West Virginia, at Arkansas, those states have had dramatic improvements. And Arkansas, I think, is the gold standard at this point. They've got a very strong, clear, and convincing evidence as far as an evidentiary standard. They've got a pretty rock-solid bill. But like I say, I think all the bills that have passed, it's sent a message across the country that things are moving this direction. And I think we're seeing that. Most of the younger judges coming up are starting to give more favorable rulings. It's the old guard that have been around for 40 years, and they're determined to find any loophole in the law they can.
There's another question here. What states have best case or most enforceable equal parenting laws?
Arkansas has the best. Hands down. They've got the gold standard. They've got a clear and convincing evidence. Their definitions are rock solid. I would say that's the most solid bill. West Virginia passed one last year, which I think is very, very good too. That's right up there with an Arkansas. Kentucky passed one that for the bill itself was great. They did add a small amendment on But I don't think it's a bad bill. I know there were a lot of people that attacked the bill, and I think people thought I was attacking the bill. I'm not. I think 98% or 99% of everybody in Kentucky has benefited in a great way from that bill. We've got facts and figures and statistics that back that up. There's a small little amendment that was added on that I think we can change down the road. So it's not a big deal. And like I said, unfortunately, I think people created drama within the shared parenting community thinking I was attacking the people who fought for that bill. I'll tell you what, the people who fought for that bill worked their tails off and did something great for that state and for the whole country. Because if it wasn't for the Kentucky bill, I don't think we would have had the success that we had in places like Arkansas and West Virginia and other states that are moving the ball. But I always tell people, when a bill passes, just like the Missouri bill, you need to analyze it. What are the great parts of the bill? What are the parts that we'd like to tweak if we could? And what do we need to do different moving forward? So as someone who's been around the political arena for 4 years, just like with a football game, you may have won the game, but if you're a professional football player, you go and watch the tapes of the game afterwards, and you study those tapes, and you study every single play. That doesn't mean it was a bad game. That doesn't mean you were a bad team. But what that says is, if my ultimate goal is 50-50 in all 50 states, what can I learn about what this state did right and what they did wrong? And the same way, like I said, I'll do the same thing on the bills that I'm working at in Missouri. I'm fighting like crazy to get the bill passed, but after it passes, I'm going to analyze. Okay, what did we have to give up in this bill that still needs to be tweaked? That if I could caution another state, hey, be careful. They're going to try and get you to add this amendment on at the last second. So I need to try and learn from my own efforts too. And I always tell people the same thing when you meet with legislators. I'm amazed and almost concerned at times when people come out of an office and they do a Facebook Live or they try and tell people how great their meeting was with the legislator and make it sound like they changed the world. Well, first off, one meeting isn't going to change the world with the legislator. Okay, it has to move from their head to their heart. And you won't always be the one who's going to do that. But the other key is, when I walk out of a legislator's office, I'm not looking at what did I do right. I'm looking at what do I need to improve for the next time. That's why I always tell people, you need to be an avid reader and read self-development books. Read books by John Maxwell, by Brian Tracy, by Dale Carnegie. Because when you walk out of an office, if you walk out thinking that you were the magic that changed the world, we don't want you meeting with legislators anymore. You need to walk out of the office like a professional, and any professional does an analysis after every meeting and does a plan, do, check, adjust. What do I need to tweak for the next meeting that I walk out of here?
Thank you, Mark. Any follow-up question, Bill?
No, I think Mark has done a great job of informing people about the process, and you're right. It is about making the connections and trying to get them to personalize the issue, whether it's through their family or someone they know, so they can have some kind of connection to this process and understand it. That's the most difficult thing I find in trying to make people aware of parental alienation or intimate partner violence by proxy, domestic violence by proxy, however you'd like to label what happens in cases of parental alienation. It's abuse. It's a targeted act, malicious act by one party against the other to try and interfere with the loving relationship of a parent and child. It's abuse, and it's damaging to everyone involved in the situation. And if, like you said, if people haven't experienced it themselves, it's harder for them to conceptualize the process. But if you can hit something that they do recognize, like you said, a brother, a sister, cousin, relative, somebody that they've seen this process, but they didn't know what it was, you're right. They are then able to identify it, recognize it, and have an ability to possibly understand what you're trying to present to them instead of having no frame of reference whatsoever. So that's one of the biggest issues people need to overcome when dealing or presenting this information to legislators.
Yeah, the other thing too is, as I was saying earlier, that people don't need to be an expert And to be honest, a lot of times it's sort of like a third party referral, almost like the salesperson will use the engineer. So they'll build the relationship. And if the person has a question, they've built up the engineer. So they normally don't know a lot about the product, but they edify the engineer. Hey, I don't know the answer to this, but let me tell you, this engineer, boy, they are great at this, blah, 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 blah. So when you do need to call in the engineer, they've edified them. So I've done this many times with people that say, Mark, I get nervous talking to legislators. I don't know what to say. And I say, great, then do this. Go to your because if you're a constituent, that's the magic words every legislator needs to hear. If you talk to any legislator or any legislative aide, they will tell you the magic words are, you're a constituent. Because no legislator wants to go into a re-election cycle with somebody saying, I called my legislator and they wouldn't even take my call. So if you're, they won't take somebody else's call. So if you call somebody from another district, they don't have to take your call. But if you start out by saying, I'm a constituent, man, their ears are open now. They want to know what you're talking about. So all you have to do then is say, look, I have a situation that happened to me. I've been alienated from my child. I don't know what to do. This issue has been going all around the country. This year, there's over 30 pieces of legislation in 30 states around the country. I don't know all the details, but I have a friend of mine who right now is working on most of those pieces of legislation. Would you have time to take a phone call with him if I could have him explain to you on a conference call with me and him? And most legislators love doing that because now they've basically sold their constituent that, hey, I'm listening to you. I'm working for you. You asked me to take this call and I'm taking this call. So I can get on a call because I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. And in 5 minutes, I can articulate enough of a message to get the ball rolling. And and that's why I said we work together as a team. Sometimes if I call a legislator cold, not always am I going to get through to them. But if a constituent calls, they're going to get that call. So imagine if everybody who watches this called their legislator tomorrow and said, hey, I don't know all the details, but I could get Mark on the phone with you. Can you imagine how many wheels we'd get rolling in how many states across the U.S. right now? And unfortunately, I'm not as familiar with the legislative process in Canada, but all over North America, we would get things moving if everybody watching this would just do that on Monday, call their legislative office and say, this issue's affecting me. I've never been involved in legislation. I don't know what to do, but I have a friend of mine because if you're watching me on video, we're friends. So, but I have a friend of mine that I can get you in contact with. Could you take a 7-minute conference call with him that we can describe this issue and what needs to be changed in our state? And I do that on a weekly basis. I'm doing 5 or 10 of those every single week.
Well, it's so, I'm not sure if the same, in Canada, it's been a tough ground, so far trying to get shared parenting. I know they've tried before, Brian Ladmer, sponsored a bill a couple of years ago, which didn't go too well. It didn't get anywhere. And we are still making efforts. But I'm learning a lot from you tonight, Mark, that, it's just about reaching out, to your legislators and sort of building relationships with them as a starting point.
Yeah, and I think as we have more success in the U.S., it's going to get the attention because the U.S. is on a steamroll now. I mean, it started with, Kentucky and Arkansas and West Virginia, but we passed smaller bills in Oklahoma. We passed the facts, findings, and conclusions in Missouri and Tennessee last year. We passed a bill in Texas last year. I think Missouri's going to pass the big one this year. I think Ohio and South Carolina have a great chance. The McNeeses in Ohio have done a phenomenal. I think they've got 60 co-sponsors in Ohio. And John Gallman in South Carolina, I think, has 60 co-sponsors in South Carolina. So those two states are really gaining momentum. And once we get a couple more states in the U.S., I think it's just going to be a tidal wave. It'll be the shot heard across the country as bring all the states. And when that happens, the ripple effect is going to start happening in Canada and other countries around the world.
Yeah. So, Mark, is it would it be effective to sort of, as an initial conversation, write some sort of letters, like a personalized letters to the legislators, introducing yourself and the issue at hand, and then you can follow up with sort of a phone call or some sort of
Yeah, Great question. If you do a letter, keep it to 1 page or less.
Okay.
Legislators get so many emails and mail every day that if I'm a legislator, remember I told you how much information they do every day. If they see a 2 or 3 page letter, it's gone. It's in the trash. They're just not going to have time to read it. So you've got to condense what you're saying to 1 page or less.
Okay.
A phone call is much more effective though, because that you've got the voice fluctuation. You're communicating more on an emotional level. With a letter, it's very hard to get them to an emotional level to connect with what you're writing. So it's not bad to do that. But I always say start out with a phone call.
Okay.
And the other key too is build that relationship with the legislative aide. So many people think they want to bypass the gatekeeper and go straight to the legislator. Like in Missouri, we have 8-year term limits. Those legislative aides have been there for 20, 30, 40 years. And they know all the other legislative aides. They all go out together on weekends. They all go out drinking together at night. If you get a state that has term limits, you will get more done by building relationships with the legislative aides, because most legislators, the first 2 years they come in, they don't know anything. They'll be asking their legislative aides, hey, what do I do now? What's the next step of the process here? They're being coached by their legislative aides. So I'm amazed at how many people bypass those people. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? That's your influencer right there. Build a relationship with them. So don't be shy about, thinking, well, all I got was their legislative aide. No, if you can get 2 or 3 minutes on the phone with them, build that friendship with them. Ask them how their day's going. Ask about their kids. Ask about what they did over the weekend. Do it, with social media nowadays, like I said, Google that legislative aide. Find out about them. And I promise you this, you're the only person that day that asked about the legislative aide, because everybody else is using that aide to get to the legislator. You build up, if you start asking it, I'm telling you, they will do favors for you like you can't imagine. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten phone calls from a chief of staff because I built up a friendship with them when they were starting out as a legislative aide, and everybody treated them like dirt and ignored them. And I would go in and talk about their weekend and what they did over the weekend. And now I get the phone calls from, hey, Mark, just so you know, it looks like your bill's going to the floor. Hey, just so you know. And they tell me stuff before it hits, the public circuit. They'll give me the inside scoop. So it takes a while, but you're going to need to plant the seeds by building a relationship with those legislative aides. And a lot of times those are the aides now that are in DC. Some of the people that I built relationships with years ago in the state house now work in the U.S. Congress as a chief of staff for somebody else. And nowadays, everybody would love to get a hold of that person, but they can't. I can't because I built the relationship years ago when they were a nobody. So I always tell people, the people you think are nobodies, you better treat them. First off, it's just a good principle in life. I always tell people, when I take people out to eat, I watch how they treat that waiter or waitress, because that tells me a lot about their heart and their character and their integrity. If they think they're too good and the waiter's just there to serve them, that's not the best person you want for a business partner. But if they're talking and interacting and treating people nice, it was years ago I worked on the staff for Hands Across America with Michael Jackson and Lionel Richie. And one thing that always amazed me with Michael Jackson, I don't care how busy he was, if somebody handed him a glass of water, here's the guy that at the time was the most powerful rock icon there was. And if somebody handed him a glass of water, every time he would turn and say, thank you. But I mean, he would always acknowledge somebody else. So be that kind of person. Legislative aides, you're not too good to talk to them. Treat them right, and someday it's going to come back to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mark. Time is fast spent, but would love to have you back again. You have quite a lot of experience in this field, and I've learned a lot from you tonight. I believe Bill, has equally learned so much on how we need to reach out, to the aides and also to the legislators as well. It's been very, very informative. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks again, like I said, for everything that you do. Like I said, that's the key that we all need to realize is we're all a team collaborating. Find what you do great and excel at that. Find what you don't do well and find somebody else who can fill that. I don't need to be a podcaster. I don't think I have a personality for a podcaster. I'm kind of bored, but I don't have
Well,
to.
try.
I can find people like you that can carry that weight while I'm doing the legislative, and now we become a team. So like I said, I'm very genuinely grateful for people like you that are doing something that I just don't have that skill set.
Yeah. You know, my
Well, thank
background
you,
is not
Mark.
in podcasting. My background is not in podcasting. It's not in broadcasting as well. But you know, it's just the crisis or the situation drove me to this point to raise awareness. I'm better off to do this than to just sit back and be quiet, hoping that somebody else will pick it up. And I think for me, it's just I'm doing this for our future generation, that they will grow up, knowing that somebody fought for them, or a group of people fought for them, and for them to realize that we fought for something good, right? It's not about us; it's about our children.
Yeah.
Their emotional and mental stability. For me, that's my greatest concern. That if we don't fight now, or if we don't advocate now, they'll grow up broken in life. And I think we all have a responsibility to sort of, raise our voices, to speak on their behalf, because they can't express themselves. We can, and we have, that grace to be able to do that. And so I've made it a course, to keep pushing until something changes here. Um, Bill, any final comments?
No, I just again like to say thank you to Mark for sharing your information about the process and for informing people of how to make the connections and try to build those relationships so that you can get the information passed on to the people that can make a difference.
Yeah, and if anybody out there wants help, reach out to me. Like I said, that's my ultimate goal, is to be a behind-the-scenes advisor and mentor, coaching people through the process. So if anybody's wanting to get involved in a state, reach out to me. I would love to help you out.
Yeah. Any final words from you, Mark, to the audience? I know there are quite a lot of followers.
Yeah, that's just it. Like I said, if I can help anyone, reach out to me. I've got my Facebook page, Americans for Equal Shared Parenting. And I haven't done them in a while. I've had some health issues, but I do plan on getting back and doing more of the educational series on how to get legislation passed. But as I said, reach out to me if I can help anybody in any state. My email address, I don't know if there's a way for you guys to type it in, but it's Ludwig at afesp.com, which is the abbreviations of Americans for Equal Shared Parenting.
So can you repeat that again for me, Mark?
M Ludwig, so MLUDWIG at A for Americans, F for 4, E for equal, S for shared, and P for parenting. So M Ludwig at afesp.com is my email.
Okay, I just posted it.
Yeah, so if anybody needs help, I would love to help out. Just shoot me an email and I'll get back to you and we can see if we can get things rolling in your state.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be the first to reach out to you, Mark. There's a lot for me to learn. And I'll be the first to to connect with you. This is so passionate to Bill and I, and we want to see a change.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, guys. I need to get back out to Ubering. Unfortunately, I've been doing all this volunteer for a while. We raised enough money that I was able to get a small, $1,500 a month, which is funny because people were complaining. They're like, he's making money off that. I'm like, why don't you try living on $1,500 a month while you're traveling to 29 states? You're not paying your bills on that. But unfortunately, that money ran out 2 years ago. So I've been supporting most of our efforts with my Uber driving. And we just had a Cardinal game and a Blues hockey game. So there's like primetime Uber driving right now in St. Louis. Yeah. I've been looking at all the surges on my phone while we've been talking. Like, we're going to get out there and try and make some money here tonight.
All right.
Thank you so much, Mark. God bless you. Yeah, God bless you for what you do. And, I look forward to talking to you again.
All right. Thanks again, guys.
You're welcome. Have a good night, Mark.
Good night.
All right.